Hello everyone, welcome back to Critic.Reading.Writing. My name is Quayson and I am Professor of English and Chair of the Department of African and African American Studies at Stanford University. It's been almost 2 years since our last episode when I promised to post a new series on magical realism. I'm returning now to do just that, and I hope you will join me in what I promise will be an exciting set of discussions on magical realist literature from all around the world. Today's episode will focus on providing a working definition of magical realism. Magical realism is a mode of writing that sets up a scrupulous equivalence between the fantastical and the real. The ways in which this equivalence is established varies from text to text, but generally aims at eliminating any surprise or alarm by the appearance of the fantastic elements alongside realistic details. Furthermore, the fantastic is not the source of either relief or terror or the resolution of a narrative or ethical impasse within the narrative. The fantastic is not also the sign of a systemic disorder of which it might be taken to be an uncanny symptom or precursor. The sources of the fantastic in magical realism vary widely and can include folktale motifs, fragments from Greek myths, sacred texts such as the Bible, the Quran, the Mahabharata, the Mayan Popol Vuh, and many others. We will see that magical realism has been manifested in writings from many cultures and from all around the world. The assertion of Latin America as being the privileged site of magical realism is one that is frequently echoed by literary critics. This is based on the assumption that the boom period of Latin American literature in the 1960s was what revealed magical realism to the world for the first time. Latin American magical realist literature was taken as the expression of a special form of postcolonial literary sensibility thoroughly immersed in indigenous forms of storytelling that ran counter to the protocols of Western realism. Though this proposition is perfectly understandable, it also does not address the question of how to account for the mixture of fantastic and real elements in literatures from all across the world and from different historical epochs, ranging from Cervantes' Don Quixote, 1604, Shakespeare's Hamlet, 1601, and Macbeth, 1605-06. Bram Stoker's Dracula, 1897, Amos Tutuola's My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, 1954, Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, 1967, Angela Carter's Night at the Circus, 1984, Robert Kretsch's What the Crow Said, 1978, and Lauren Boex's Zoo City, 2010, to name just a few eclectic examples. In their introduction to magical realism in literature, 2020, Christopher Warnes and Kim Anderson Sasser instead argue for a polygenetic theory of the development of magical realism. That is to say, that magical realism derives from different historical and cultural sources. This is the approach that I endorse and that I will be trying to illustrate in the episodes to follow. Two key features of magical realism need to be specifically noted in relation to the location or the fantastic within this mode of writing. These are the general instability of the perceived world and the nature and range of the boundary blurrings between the human world and those of other species or worlds. In both cases, we find that magical realism normalizes what in other contexts would be patently abnormal and perhaps even deeply unsettling. Thus, even though in the represented worlds of magical realist texts, anything can literally happen, there is no sense that this instability is the signal of a systemic disorder. On the contrary, the instability and fragmentation brought on by the collocation of the fantastic and the real produce what in Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude is referred to more than once as a penetrating lucidity beyond the bounds of formalism. In other words, the regular fragmentations and apparent leakages between the fantastic and the real are an invitation for us to look beyond any settled norms of epistemology and ontology conventionally associated with literary realism. The same applies to the many examples of metamorphosis that we find in varied magical realist texts, such as in Miguel Angel Asturias' Men of Maize, 1949, and Murilo Rubiao's The Ex-Magician and Other Stories, 1965. Often, metamorphosis and the blurring of boundaries between the human and the animal worlds are meant to suggest the harmony of heterogeneous ontologies and forms of life rather than the signs of dysfunction in the world at large. To expand on this point about metamorphosis and boundary blurrings a bit further, we should note the contrast between, say, Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis, 1915, and the various other magical realist texts we will be looking at. Even though Marquez cites Kafka's story as the source of inspiration for him becoming a writer, Kafka situates the fantastic in a completely different way in his story than any of the magical realist texts we'll be seeing later. When Gregor Samsa wakes up one morning to find himself transformed into an insect, he is progressively assimilated by the narrative to the category of the uncanny. This is particularly so in the eyes of his immediate family. And yet, in his own eyes, Gregor still has the same human impulses that have always defined him prior to his metamorphosis. After the incident with the apples, in which one of them is lodged painfully in his back, his father must force himself to suppress his disgust and the sight of this insect. The serious injury done to Gregor, which disabled him for more than a month, the apple went on sticking in his body as a visible reminder, since no one ventured to remove it, seemed to have made even his father recollect that Gregor was a member of the family, despite his present unfortunate shape, and ought not to be treated as an enemy. That, on the contrary, family duty required the suppression of disgust and the exercise of patience, nothing but patience. The word ought in his father's mind is precisely the signal of the impossibility of suppressing his sense of disgust in the face of his son's metamorphosis. In a magical realist text, the metamorphosis would have quickly been normalized by the family. Significantly, however, Kafka also establishes a more complex source for the uncanny in the story. The family's confrontation with Gregor's metamorphosis is paralleled by the socially and economically disabling conditions within which their family exists. They are shown to be mired in problems of survival and as being under the pressure of unfavorable working conditions. The negative effect of this systemic disorder is captured in the malaise and emotional aridity that is brought on by the oppressive and mechanical forms of economic labor that members of the family struggle under. Gregor's metamorphosis, which at one level is a metaphor for an unexpected physical disability that his family members must learn to cope with, is simultaneously paralleled by the disabling conditions that configure their existence more generally. The uncanny of boundary blurring between the human and the animal insect worlds is then a dimension of a larger social disorder which the family members struggle against in complete futility. They are themselves like insects trapped in the webwork of economic oppression, Gregor's condition being the materialization in their midst of something that transcends their powers of comprehension. When at Gregor's death they grant themselves the relief of a tram journey in the open country and begin to imagine the brighter things that are open to them, the immediate relief derives from the apparent retreat of the uncanny from their lives. But because we are aware of its wider source in economic oppression, we can only conclude that this is an ironic ending that serves to temporarily conceal the impact of systemic disorder upon their lives. For there remain the struggles of survival under a dehumanizing capitalism to contend with. As we shall see in later episodes, there are major contrasts in the blurring of boundaries between the human and the animal and insect worlds than what we see in Kafka's short story, from that to be found in other magical realist texts. Even from the discussion so far, we can see that magical realism is not one simple genre or mode of writing. It is full of surprising twists and turns, and is also constantly evolving. Thus, as we shall discover, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude fuses motifs and metaphors from Greek mythology, the 1001 Nights, biblical tales, and Catholic iconography to produce an ever-shifting set of fantastical sources, while Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children also draws from the storytelling context of the 1001 Nights, but combines this with motifs from the sacred Hindu texts, Bollywood movies, and also from popular advertising in Mumbai to generate a highly eclectic resource base of fantastic elements. And with Ben Okri, the transposition of an animist materialism into his mode of magical realism serves to highlight his debt to a long tradition of Nigerian and African sources of orality. All of these texts and the others we will be discussing point to the inexhaustible nature of the matrices that can be drawn upon for magical realism. But beyond that, they also hint at the means by which humanity may renew itself, not by subsuming the fruits of what seems fantastic and strange under the negative judgment of Western rationality, but to celebrate and open itself to the fecundities of the unexpected. For, as the Brazilian fabulist Paulo Coelho puts it, the skeptic thinks that the world is mad, but the wise man knows that the real difficulty is in choosing well your own madness. Thank you very much. Please remember to check out the suggested readings in the episode's description. And if you like this episode, give a thumbs up, subscribe and share, hit the notifications bell so that you do not miss out on any upcoming episodes. and enter your comments in the section below. See you next week.
Okay, I think that's good.
I'm like, no, this is his moment.
Subscribe and share. Hit the notifications bell. That's my favorite part.